Hi, Jenny.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Hey, Mark.
I'm starting to feel like we can say hi to each other when we show up on the screen now. So, hi, Mara.
Hi, it's good to see you. We'll wait just a few minutes here and see if we get a few more joining us. We technically at least have a quorum, but it'd be nice to have a few extra. Good evening, Blake. Good to see you. We may have a few more still joining us, but we are right at 5:30, so I will call our meeting to order. Karen, can we have a roll call, please?
Sure. Councilmember EDA member Roberts.
Here.
Member Huntosh. Member Husnick.
Here.
Member Finneman.
Here.
Member Lorge.
Here.
And Member Erickson. And President Bain.
Sure. Ask everybody to join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'd like to shut off your camera before you do so, you can do that in the bottom left of your Zoom tray. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Members of the EDA, we have an agenda before you this evening. I will entertain a motion to approve.
I move we approve the agenda.
I'll second.
We have a motion from Member Lorge and a second from Member Finneman. Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Member Roberts.
Aye.
Member Husnick.
Aye.
Member Finneman.
Aye.
Member Lorge.
Aye.
And President Bain.
Aye. Agenda is approved. Our first item on the agenda this evening is the minutes from our regular meeting of February 8th, 2021. I will entertain either a motion to approve or any changes. Is there a motion?
I'll move that we approve the minutes from the regular meeting of February 8th, 2021.
I'll second that.
Member from Councilmember Husnick, a second from Member Roberts. Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Member Roberts.
Aye.
Member Husnick.
Aye.
Member Finneman.
Aye.
Member Lorge.
Aye.
And President Bain.
Aye, minutes approved. And another set of minutes, this time from the Downtown Committee Workshop, February 22nd, 2021. I'll entertain a motion or any changes.
Okay, Mara, I'll motion that we approve the minutes from the Downtown Committee Workshop of February 22nd, 2021.
I'll second.
A member from Councilmember Husnick, a second from Member Finneman, and Karen, another roll call, please.
Member Roberts.
Aye.
Member Husnick.
Aye.
Member Finneman.
Aye.
Member Lorge.
Aye.
and President Bain.
Aye, and minutes are approved. Our next regular agenda item this evening is a review of the 2021 budget update. We do have before you this evening a fairly sizable contract for the downtown committee workshop. And so we just wanted to have a broader context around overall budget, just so there's full transparency to where we are sitting from a budget perspective. And Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, President, members of the EDA. That's exactly why we had this on the agenda tonight. It's just basically giving everybody the check-in as to where we are with the 2021 budget. In your packet, this is slightly out of sequence. So this is actually on page 12 is where the memo is for the budget update. Again, just want to be here tonight just to give a brief update on the budget. We do have some additional clarity that we now know at the end of quarter 1 that we did not know at the end of 20 when we were setting this budget up. And just before I pulled a spreadsheet up on the screen, I just want to remind the EDA that the decision was made to spend down the fund balance in 21 versus increase the levy to account for a lot of these one-time expenses that we have on the work plan for 21. So that's why you sort of see a reduction in fund balance here for 21. Let me just do a quick screen share here. Can everybody see the updated spreadsheet? Is that viewable on everybody's screen? Or is it too small?
Yeah,
It's
just
small.
increase the size just a little bit.
I will do my best here. Let me see. Oh, there we go. Of course, this is what happens when I don't save it as a PDF first. I'm using it directly in Word. Is that a little bit better?
This is good.
Okay. All right. So the numbers here, again, kind of keep in mind that these numbers are still kind of subject to change as we go through 21, but kind of wanted to give, again, the key and update. So looking at starting in 21, we have an estimated fund balance of $210,000. Again, this is not an audited number, so that number is still subject to some minor changes as we get through our audit here coming up. So we're starting with about $210,000. Looking at our downtown planning expenses, which is on the agenda for tonight, those are coming in at $90,000. That includes both the planner from HKGI as well as the TAP panel, a technical assistance panel from ULI. That's the market review of our downtown plan. So we want to make sure that we take that out to market to get market feedback before we finalize the plan. So those two expenses are estimated at 90. One thing to note about this one is given that we're starting planning in March, that will potentially run over 2 budget cycles. So there will be some of that tailing into 22, but wanted the full amount represented here on this update. We have the new chamber agreement for the BR&E activities that we signed last year. That comes in at $5,000. The one-time expense, which is the license fee waiver transfer to the general fund, which is the resolution, which is up next on the agenda. That came in at $45,850. These next 3 items here, or excuse me, these next 2 items, there's a little bit of shifting here from what was presented back in the end of 20. Downtown committee, I reduced this amount given the fact that primarily what the downtown committee is going to be involved in is planning activities for the remainder of 20. So that's going to take up my estimation, a lot of their bandwidth. So I did do a slight reduction in the amount of funds that we would have earmarked for downtown committee activities. The downtown incentive program, I ended up increasing this amount. Typically we go through or give out one incentive program a year. But as of right now, I do have 2 applications on my desk that I'm awaiting some additional information from. I had also heard that there's a potential 3rd coming in. So I wanted to reflect the current market or current numbers of applications that I'm aware of on this. So I did increase that one to 15,000. Trade show marketing and new tracks. Both of those are kind of on hold right now, still in a holding pattern, just kind of seeing where COVID's going to go, but wanted to be aware of the fact that those come back online, in Q3 and 4 this year, in second quarter, third and fourth quarter, to be prepared to have those on there. So wanted full disclosure on this budget update. Operating budget stays pretty much the same, 22,000. So looking at total expenses this year, estimated at 201,000. And then we have the revenues that come in. We do have the reimbursements for the CDA grant. So when we expense out based on from the planning activities, we will be able to be reimbursed through Washington County through that grant that we got approved at the beginning of 2020. And then we had the property tax levy amount at $50,000 for the EDA. When you do all the math, it ends up with a fund balance that's projected for the end of 2021 at right around 100,000, just south of that, about $98,000. So even though we are spending quite a bit of money here in 21, we still are going to have a pretty healthy fund balance at the end of 21 to really start those activities that are going to be identified as part of that downtown plan. So in reviewing the numbers, feel pretty confident that even though, yes, we are going to be spending some money here, we still have a healthy fund balance after all these expenses will clear the books. So with that, just wanted to give the EDA an update on the budget, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone may have based on that update.
Any questions for Dan today on the budget? Dan, two quick things. Oh, if I can, Blake. Do we have an estimated start time for new tracks? Has there been discussion, or is that still tentative?
It's still tentative at this point. Nothing's been formalized. I think we're waiting to hear kind of exactly what COVID restrictions are going to do. But I wanted to at least have that number accounted for. So when they are coming back online, we're not having to kind of scramble, try to find funds or spend those funds elsewhere. Wanted to keep them earmarked for new tracks.
And one more question on that spreadsheet, you had property taxes identified for 50,000. Is that the general fund support of the annual general fund support of the EDA? Is that what that is?
Correct. Yeah, it's a separate levy item on the taxes that go to the EDA.
I interrupted you, Blake. Go ahead.
Yeah, so how does this, with the city supposedly getting or potentially a 2.3 million on this the new stimulus package that just came through, how does that factor into any monies that maybe go to the EDA? Is it something that the licensing thing that we did, could that be reimbursed to the EDA if need be, or just kind of curious on that?
Yeah, I'm not sure we know the rules around that money yet. It's early from what I've gathered and read. It may be a few months before we actually get some guidance on that one. So we have to wait and see.
But is that approximately what the city's planning
About
on?
2.3 million is what the estimate is at this point. Yeah.
Okay.
What was that estimate?
Approximately $2.3 million.
I would, so that is it's a big number because we are so close to that bill just being signed and we are so preliminary and understanding what the impact is to the city. I would encourage us to make this decision tonight, not expecting that. Now that might change, but I think we don't know, and until we know that it's slotted and how those monies are to be determined, I think we're a little preliminary. So I would, there might be some opportunity there, but I would encourage us to feel comfortable that if nothing came in, that we would still be comfortable with the scale and scope of project. Other questions related to the overall budget? Again, Dan, you were not looking for specific action on this tonight, right? It was just more of a heads up given the next discussions.
Correct. Yeah, I figured the EDA might want to just have an idea of where all these expenses will make what happens to fund balance in light of all these expenses that are on the agenda for this evening. So it's just an update to the EDA.
Understood. Thank you. And we can circle back as we're having other discussion topics too, if something else, if we need to pull back that agenda item or pull back the budget item.
Yeah, it is on my screen right now in the right Zoom format. So if we need to pull it back up, it'll be an easy for me to reference.
All right. That said, let's move to our next agenda item if we can. Our next agenda item is EDA Resolution 03222101, which is the resolution recommending authorization of fund balance transfers for the EDA for the 2021 business license fee waivers. We've talked about this a couple of times. This is the formal resolution to move those funds. And I'll turn it over to Dan. I do know council has a sister resolution on their agenda this evening to accept the funds. So just one sequence of events this evening. Dan, go ahead.
Present members of the EDA, this is more of like, as President Bain alluded to, more of a procedural item that's on the agenda tonight. This is actually this resolution actually recommends council make the fund transfer, since council would be the one that transfers between the two funds. So this is EDA telling council, we recommend that the fund balance transfer take place for the license fee waivers. If you recall, back at the end of 2020, the EDA made the recommendation to the city council to waive certain license fees for the 2021 licensing year. Those particular licenses that were waived were the liquor on sale licenses, the massage therapist license, and the massage location licenses. Those were primarily the industries that were most heavily impacted by the COVID shutdown, the COVID restrictions that were in place. There are also the areas of the city where we actually have licensing, that we can, do something to support those businesses that were impacted by the COVID shutdowns. As part of that original resolution, the EDA agreed to use EDA fund balance to reimburse the general fund for the lost revenues that the general fund would see as a result of waiving the fees for those license types. We estimated that revenue loss would be somewhere in the ballpark of right around $45,000. The actual came in at $45,850, so well, within the estimates that we presented back at the end of 20. The resolution that is before you tonight does recommend to the council the authorization to perform the fund balance transfer from the EDA fund, which is Fund 212, to the general fund. I have included in the packet as well a spreadsheet showing the breakdown of the waived license fees that are attached. It does show what licenses were waived and the amounts that were waived, the amounts that each business got as a result of this fee transfer. Staff is recommending approval of the EDA Resolution 0322-21-01, which recommends to the council the authorization of the fund transfer for the waived business licensing fees for 2021. As President Bain said, the city council does have on their agenda tonight the resolution, which will then finalize the fund balance transfer, which will move the funds in from the EDA fund to the general fund. At this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions the EDA may have regarding the license fee waivers or the transfer resolution.
Any questions for Dan? While you're thinking about that, I don't know if these emails were ever forwarded on to EDA, and if not, Karen, if you could do so, that'd be great. We did get feedback from 3 different businesses around the time the notices were coming out. Just thank yous to council and the city overall for funding the license waivers. And Karen, I'm not sure if that went to the EDA or not, but if not, if you could forward those, it'd be just good to see. Nice to see some positive response.
I would move that we approve the transfer.
I'll
Motion
second.
from member Finneman and a second from member Lorge. Any further discussion on this item? Not hearing any. Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Member Roberts,
Aye.
member Husnick,
Aye.
member Finneman,
Aye.
member Lorge,
Aye.
and President Bain.
Aye. Motion approved. Our next item on the agenda this evening is the HKGI downtown planning proposal. Dan, you want to walk us through this as well?
Yep, President, members of the EDA. Tonight on the agenda is the agreement between this EDA and HKGI for planning purposes for downtown Forest Lake. The agreement that you have in the packet is representative of the feedback that HKGI got from the EDA and the downtown committee during the previous 3 meetings where we did meet with them, ask them questions of their proposal. This agreement has a cost not to exceed $80,300 total for the downtown planning for Forest Lake. There's also 2 additional optional services that we can enter into if the EDA so desires. The first is the peer community comparative analysis. That one is $9,600. And the second is the catalyst site redevelopment concepts. And that one is $8,700. If you look at the agreement, the EDA does not need to approve the optional services as part of the overall proposal agreement approval. But if at a later date, the EDA decides that these services would be valuable to the project, we can authorize them by submitting a written request to HKGI. Additionally, if we determine that additional meetings or additional deliverables or, say additional community outreach is required or is requested outside of what's included in the scope, we do have the ability to add those additional services through, again, another written request to HKGI. So while this proposal does have a fairly robust meeting schedule and community outreach, involvement, if we decide we need more at a later date, we can add those services or amend this agreement just through a written request to HKGI. For the deliverables and the timeline, we're looking for the entire length of the planning process is going to be 12 months from start to finish. And you see that outlined in section G. That clock starts once notice that this agreement is approved and is given back to HKGI. So I would anticipate if it's approved tonight, we're looking at probably in April 1st, sometime in early part of April start time. And then that would have the planning processes end in April of 2022. So 12 months from the time we get that back to HKGI. Attachment A of the proposal does go through a full breakdown of the complete schedule that they're proposing, as well as lists out all of the deliverables that they will be delivering to the EDA and downtown committee at the various steps along the planning process. Tonight, it is staff's recommendation to approve the HKGI planning proposal for downtown Forest Lake. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions regarding the proposal or just overall next steps for this planning process.
Thank you, Dan. Members of the EDA, what additional questions might we have this evening? I know this has been a topic of multiple workshops and multiple discussions, but happy to entertain any remaining questions that are out there. Thoughts on scope? I know we've had some discussion around the supplemental projects and whether or not whether those would be things we were interested in. I'm interested in some feedback on that as well. Member Finman, go ahead.
Given the fact that we can reclaim those additional services at some future time, I honestly don't find any real value in either the comparative dynamic or the site-specific greater detail design. I've got my theories about that, but as long as we can separate that from the rest of the agreement and be able to agree to the basic planning terms, then I'm fine with approving them as is without those additional services and getting on with the process.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Other feedback items? I would agree. I am supportive of the proposal overall and the project overall, excited to get started. I'm interested in learning more about the additional projects. Don't feel that we need to commit to that on day one. We may find ways of accomplishing those through other means. So I'm happy to have them as part of the overall proposal, but don't feel that that would be needed to be part of scope this evening. Any questions, hesitancy? Go ahead, Blake.
Yes, I would echo your sentiments and Commissioner Finneman's as well. I missed one of the original meetings. So what then is as far as checking back in, is it through the downtown committee? Is it the EDA, city council, all, or how does that, what does that look like going forward? Again, I apologize if I missed that earlier on.
Dan, maybe a good opportunity to pull that slide up because there's a little something for everybody as part of that engagement plan.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't have the full agreement in front of me, but I can at least, I have a hard copy of it in front of me. I don't have that one digital. I apologize for that. But to Commissioner Roberts' point, there are like numerous points along the steps where we'll be engaging with the downtown committee, city council, and various community groups. So for example, the first one, when you organize, kind of kick off the project, that one starts with a downtown committee and other groups that we want to invite into that kickoff meeting. there are a couple of in May and near the end of the process, sort of joint sessions between the downtown committee and city council that are planned to really those check-ins to make sure everybody's on the same page as we go out throughout the process. And then I want to say there's
It is on
6
page 26 of the packet. There is at least the timeline that indicates the milestones with communication plans.
Yeah, correct. Thanks for that, President Bain. I did not have that one up in front, but I'm looking at it right here in
Right.
the hard
There,
copy.
that's it. Yes.
And then there's also 3 community workshops that are also envisioned as part of this too. So it's a little bit, they're trying to get as many people involved in the process as possible. And they kind of see that, we may need an additional meeting with the city council. If we determine that, we can always add that later on, like I stated, as part of this is a fairly flexible agreement that we're entering in. We have the ability, this is the bare minimum. We can always add more, a couple meetings if we need to down the road.
Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I understand those are the basic communication moments that they have to put on a chart and understand, so we can all kind of schedule that idea. I want to really intensify the programming at the start of this whole process. To me, that's the most important part of this. I think there's a real luxury in their fees such that they can tolerate a number of additional meetings, small scale meetings in City Hall or individual meetings. There's a lot of private conversation that needs to go on that I think will make people comfortable actually relaying their theories and their thoughts about how downtown should transfer or modify or change. So I'm unsure about how let's just say an individual such as myself wanted to talk to the planners. Do I go back to the EDA, get approval to visit with the planners? It's not like a legal proposition where every hour we can connect with them, we're going to be charged something. So this is a little more fluid than that. We have a set maximum cost contract. So let's just fill it in with a whole lot of interactions. And would I then, if I wanted to talk to them, go back through the EDA to get approval to speak to them for an hour, 2 hours? And if I wanted to set up a series of meetings with a variety of business people, would I have to do the same thing? Or can I call them directly? Tell me how to move forward.
To that point, Commissioner Finneman, I did have a conversation with Bruce, who's the principal planner at HKGI, sort of about what does that interaction look like. And I think to start out, you want to make any requests through staff. So I have to go back to staff to see, because they do have those meetings scheduled in as part of their proposal here. If you look at section 3, interview and focus group summary. So they do have interviews with business leaders, with business owners down there, property owners, et cetera. So that's all part of their plan. In terms of what that actually looked like, in terms of like the specific detail, I'd have to defer to the planner on that in terms of your involvement. But for initially, if you go through staff, we can relay those questions back to HKGI to see, are they going to do it on an hourly basis? Is it baked into the cost of these interviews that they're already doing? Are they using you as a resource, as a conduit to get to some of these, individuals that they may not be able to get to? So there's still a lot of questions. I think it's probably advisable to have HKGI in the room to see what their processes are to make sure that they're getting those people in the room that they need to have in the room. But initially, if you go to staff, we can relay that messaging back and figure out that pathway for you.
Okay, then we would set up a series of schedules for meetings, likely in City Hall, small groups, 2 people to 6 people kind of storylines.
Correct. And he was aware that was, the small group, and they were, when I talked to him about that, he was, wanting to meet in person if possible. I mean, that's their preferred method, is to meet face to face, obviously socially distanced and following all proper protocols. But at this point, I would have to defer the actual logistics and kind of that fine level detail you're asking for. I'd have to wait till Bruce gets on board, to really have him kind of drive those points home and determine that level of detail out, because I can't speak to that since he's to be the one driving that bus.
Well, once he's on board, expect some requests through your office to see if we can't start scheduling something and get it moving.
That's fair. I'll pass them along.
To Mark's point, and just to kind of bring this back to some of the other conversations that were had with the planner, there was a series of conversations with stakeholders that were part of that discussed plan with the planner, and the kind of the overall willingness or the desire for us to have those to be in person. It was my recollection that they were fully supportive of those, those types of, we're just now to logistics and who and when. And certainly something to get scheduled as part of, kind of a kickoff phase. Blake, go ahead.
Yeah, so if I can add something, I think having someone like Commissioner Finneman, that with his background of planning and architect and design, having him be intimately involved, if he's willing to do so, I think is key. And it doesn't cost us any additional money to do so. So I would advocate for that. And then the other question I have is, when is the city, or as far as coming back and having more in-person type things, allowing people in the city hall, is that something that's happening soon? And if so, if it's a year process, is it advantageous for us to push this a little bit, as much as I don't want to, because of, we want to get the ball rolling, and this is just there's a lot of timing here. But if that's something that maybe is going to happen in June or so, do we push this a month or so that we can have more of those in-person meetings? I think we're going to get more of our money out of the deal if we can be in person.
Chime in on just maybe a sequencing thing, and these two things may work together. So we don't have an immediate date for when we would resume in-person meetings. The current governor's orders and preference is that official public meetings continue to be held remotely if possible, is the preferred preference. However, that's changing quickly as numbers change and as more and more vaccines get out there. So it's a little tough to look around the corner. But also, I would advocate that we give some time for some ground setting. So for new developer or new planner to come on board, get lay of the land, understand more of what's been done historically, have some of those small focus group conversations, and then at that time, we may be well positioned for some of their very first meetings just to maybe be in person. We don't know that for sure, but I do think that some of their initial engagement efforts, they want context before they do that. And so I do think that there will be some time for them to have some of those smaller sessions, and that those two timelines might align fine. I wouldn't want us to wait to get started, because I do think that there is a fair amount of just background that they can do today with staff knowledge and some of those stakeholder meetings. That's just my perspective. However, Dan, chime in as well. As how have you seen that happen with the conversations you've had with Bruce?
And I think too, one thing to keep in mind too, the schedule that's in the packet envisions a beginning of March start. So that was sort of back when we were looking at getting this approved end of February. Now that we're already sort of at the end of March, we're not going to really do that kickoff meeting until the end of April. So we're already going to kind of delay that just naturally, just because of the approval process that we are currently under. So I think naturally we're going to sort of be in that kind of that sweet spot in terms of where we're going to be in terms of allowing those in-person meetings to resume. But I would agree with President Bain's statement about starting the process earlier rather than delaying it till summer, so we can at least get that groundwork set and then really kind of hit the ground running this summer. And all indications that, I've had in talking to HKGI is that they're willing to pivot as need be. I mean, they realize that this is, COVID impacts are always changing, and they're willing to, if we can go to in-person, they're gonna flip the switch and make everything to in-person. If we have to stay remote, they're willing to sort of adjust as need be. So that flexibility is in this plan, and starting it earlier gets that groundwork laid so we can really start to get that engagement happening, hopefully when we have looser restrictions due to COVID.
And being able to have a larger group just be outside might possibly want to be one of the mechanisms that helps us as well. So Blake, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, so is that then in the contract, is there any thing that we would amend saying that not so much on that 12-month, but really when the scope of work is done, based as opposed to, I heard you say, so the clock starts ticking and it's 12 months. Is that they're done in 12 months, or is it till the scope of work is done?
They have 12 months to complete the scope of work. So you got the scope of work that's before you. And so instead of having this process draw out for say 18, 24 months, they have a 12-month window with which to complete that scope of work. So it's not like at 12 months, they walk out and say, here's my half-done draft of the final plan. They're going to give you a final plan within the 12-month window that they proposed in this agreement.
Okay.
I've got a question.
Hi, Jenny.
Just to clarify, we probably went through this, but is it up to the planners then to be in constant touch with Ryan about the infrastructure and the effects with the parking lot and the watershed? And keeping that in mind when we go out and ask people what they want to see here, we have to know what we can actually handle right here, correct?
Correct. And they are aware that we are doing studies, that we have completed studies, and they will have access to all of that prior information as well as what studies are currently being done. So they'll be well aware of the grounding and the reality of their plan. And they won't just be able to pull, whatever they think may look nice. It has to have a basis in reality. They've been told that since I first started talking to them, that we are completing these studies to make sure that their plan exists within the confines of what is feasible downtown. And that's also the reason why we're doing the market study as well. So when we bring this to the market, to make sure that the market would be willing to bear this out in the future as well. So again, we're trying to ground this plan on many different principles. First is infrastructure, and then also the market as well.
Okay, thanks.
Ryan, go ahead.
Just one quick comment on that. So the studies are based on your future land use map that you guys approved and adopted in your 2040 comp plan, which is a significant change from your current land use plan. If something's proposed over and beyond that, that's not accounted for. But if you did that, that's again a whole nother leap forward than what's already been accounted for in the 2040 comp plan future land use map.
Other questions? Otherwise, anyone ready to make a motion? Mark, go ahead.
I would move that we approve the contract with the initial group that I can't come up with,
HPGI.
with not incorporating the 2 additional service items at this point in time.
A motion from Member Finneman. Is there a second?
I'll second it, Mara.
A second from Councilmember Husnick. Any further discussion on this item? Hearing none. Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Member Roberts,
Aye.
Member Husnick,
Aye.
Member Finneman,
Aye.
Member Erickson. Sorry, Member Lord,
Aye.
and President Bain.
Aye. Motion's approved. Next item this evening is the BR&E report update. Dan, you want to give us an update?
I have a presentation. Hopefully I get my screen share to work this time. Can everybody see the presentation?
Mhm.
President, members of the EDA, so I just wanted to give everybody just an update on where we are with the BR&E survey, and also review some of that initial data that came in tonight, and then also kind of outline some of the next steps in the process. So this is more of a check-in. No official action is needed tonight on this. This is more for EDA awareness of activities related to BR&E in the city. If you recall, we really worked on this starting in about the summer of last year. Kind of started scoping out what does a business retention and expansion project look like in the city of Forest Lake. Launched it in Q3, and then really did a lot of the groundwork, the survey work in Q4 of last year. And then again, a couple of the intents of that survey, the goals were, one was trying to capture the impact of COVID on the local business community. And then second was to work to reconnect the EDA with the local business communities, start to reestablish some of those communication channels between the businesses and the EDA itself. When you look at the survey, overall, we had 30 surveys completed in 2020. So we had roughly a 48% response rate. When you compare that to what we did in 2011, we had a 36% response rate back in 2011. So we had 36 surveys completed there. So even though we did sort of a reduced effort in 2020, we still got a very good response rate in line with what we saw in the past. And I think when you go through the results, our survey results do a good job of sort of capturing that snapshot in time of what COVID did, what the impacts of COVID were on the local business community. One thing I do want to stress as we go through this data is it's best to view this data as anecdotal evidence. It's not that this evidence or this data is bad. I just say that because a lot of this data in here would not stand up to like a statistical analysis or trying to model this data moving forward. There's just not enough data there, enough data points to really model off of this. So it kind of falls in that anecdotal evidence. However, I still think it's very valuable evidence or very valuable data for the EDA to have. A couple of the highlights in the survey. On the business side, most of the respondents were in that 0 to 5 full-time employee category. A surprising result that I saw out of this was that the majority of the businesses surveyed did not reduce their workforce due to COVID. So they were able to maintain workforce levels sort of throughout the pandemic. Their operating status at the time they were surveyed, all of the businesses that we surveyed were either fully reopened or partially reopened. So they weren't in a shutdown state when we completed the surveys. The outlook, most of those businesses that we did survey were mostly optimistic about the future. And I'll go into that a little bit further on when I bring up the slide on that specific question. But again, a lot of optimism still exists in our local business community. The number one challenge that the businesses saw was employee attraction and retention. This tracks hand in hand with what we see more at a regional, state, and national level. So that's kind of the number one issue a lot of businesses are facing, and that is reflective in our local business community as well. And lastly, when you look at the variety of sectors that we surveyed, we did have a wide reach within our survey work. So we did hit a nice wide variety of businesses in our survey. I'll start this out starting on question number 3 of the survey. The reason being is that question number 1 and question number 2 contain a lot of identifiable information, and I wanted to try to keep this survey results as anonymous as possible. So question number 1 and number 2, I didn't forget about them. I just did not include them in the results because I wanted to keep it as anonymous as possible. So we look at question number 3, how many employees work at this location? Here you see the majority are in that 0 to 5 or 6 to 10 category. So you're still seeing we hit primarily the smaller employers within the city of Forest Lake and got all that information from those smaller employers here within the city. This is again reflective in the part-time numbers. The majority answered they're in the 0 to 5 category for part-time employees as well. Here, out of the 28 businesses that answered this question, we had 19 did not change their business count as a result of COVID. So again, the majority that were surveyed did not have a significant employee count due to COVID-19. There were 9 that did. So a third of the businesses surveyed did have an impact and did have to reduce their or change their employee count due to COVID. But the good news is the majority of those surveyed did not have that impact. Now, this is where I will own this mistake. When I set this question up in the survey, I had hoped to set it up as a number answer versus a text answer, but unfortunately, question number 6, which, trying to quantify what that workforce change was, it went in as a text answer. So unfortunately, instead of having a nice graph that shows the actual number of gains and losses across the workforce, I got a bunch of text answers. I did import that into Excel and try to quantify it using Excel. Looking at it from terminated or laid off, we had approximately right around 20 employees that fell into those 2 categories. There were quite a few employees that were furloughed. So we had a total of over 50 employees that were under furlough. If we had additional questioning here, it'd be great to go back to see what number of those came back, or those temporary furloughs, how long did they last, et cetera. But we did see that probably my best guess based on the data set was that those furloughs were relating to the initial shutdowns that happened back in March when everybody sort of really pumped the brakes pretty hard, but ended up bringing a lot of those employees back once the restrictions were lifted. The bright spot in here is that we do see 30 new hires come in. So we did have some losses in this workforce. We did see, again, some new hires come. This is one where, again, if we had some additional question, we could kind of really dive down to a granular level on this employment data, but it just kind of shows some trends that overall, we did not have significant or large scale layoffs due to COVID-19 in the city of Forest Lake. Again, here we see all of the businesses current operating status. All of them were either open in person or partially reopened. Want to caveat this one out that we sort of hit the survey window when between shutdowns. So we surveyed after that initial shutdown happened, but before that second shutdown was in place. So I think had we surveyed a little bit later in the year, we may have seen some impact here in terms of, you know, what the shutdown or current status is. But when restrictions were loosened as they were over the summer and into the fall, we did see all businesses surveyed were, you know, fully open or partially reopened. The outlook. So this is where businesses were asked what was their outlook pre-COVID and post-COVID, and we tried to quantify the changes between what their outlook was at the beginning of 20 before COVID pandemic hit, and then sort of right in the middle of the COVID pandemic. What I did was I went through this and kind of anything from the flat or unchanged line up, I put those as pessimistic. Anything on that line or down, I put those as optimistic, just to try to roll those into two categories. So pre-COVID-19, we had 7 businesses that were pessimistic about their current position. So 7 landed in that pessimism. 3 were neutral. They were basically, you know, we're okay. And then 18 were optimistic, either slightly optimistic to very optimistic. So overall, pre-COVID, the bulk of the businesses in Forest Lake were optimistic about their future. And then post-COVID, so this would be right in the middle of the COVID pandemic, there was a slight shift to being slightly more pessimistic. We had 12 in that pessimistic camp. 1 was neutral and 16 were optimistic. So still, the majority of them were in the optimistic about their future. However, there was some shifting up to being a little bit more pessimistic about the future as a result of COVID. Want to note here as well, there was an overall difference in number of respondents. 1 answered the first question, but didn't answer the second question. So that also changed the numbers slightly. So there was a difference in the total pool of answers there. So, but overall, businesses remained overall optimistic for the future. Question number 10. This is the current challenges that the business are experiencing. Based on current conditions. Here again, this is where we see the employee attraction and retention as a number 1 issue that businesses are seeing. The bulk of them selected that answer. And then when they also were given the opportunity to answer there were 2 in the other category as well that would fall into this employee attraction and retention camp. So far and away, that is the number 1 issue that employers are facing here in the city of Forest Lake, which again tracks well with what we see on more of a national and regional level as well. These last 3 questions are more, I call them sort of the open-ended questions. We got a lot of potpourri answers here, but when you start looking at the individual responses, you can really glean a lot of insight into terms of where businesses are. Question number 11 was, how can the city or EDA help your business grow and expand? And I apologize in advance. I know that is not going to be readable on your screen just because it's barely readable on my screen. But overall here, just a couple of themes. We had a lot of businesses ask for a continuation of the Buy Local campaign to support buying local, to raise awareness to keep money within the community. Also, a handful of businesses basically said, just stay out of my way, let me do my business, and don't put regulations in place. So there was that was another theme that came out of it. But these last 3 questions, like I said, were more designed just to get some of that kind of candid feedback that we wanted from the business community, which we did end up getting in these 3 questions. Moving forward into question number 12, this would be, what priorities would you like to see the EDA or the city focus on as we work on strategic planning action next steps? A lot of this kind of focused on downtown planning. There are some requests for some additional growth and lower taxes as well, and then more growth on the south end of town. So a lot of growth feedback here. There was also quite a bit that had no answer to this question, which is fine. But those that did had some questions surrounding growth and taxes. Question number 13, do you have any other comments, questions, or concerned? Here again, kind of a potpourri of answers. But one kind of thread that jumped out at me was the request from the business owners for improvements to communication. I think they wanted more direct communications from the city to them, which we're working on establishing those channels. But that was one of the threads that came out of this last question was, just improve communications between the city and them. So next steps. What's included in the packet is that summary level data that I just went through. So every member of the EDA should have the summary data that I presented this evening. This data will then, I'll roll this up and develop a final report that'll be drafted and submitted to the EDA. The format of this report will look very similar to what the last one did, where they went through and identified some of the issues that were laid out or found out or identified in the survey, and then also develop sort of some action steps to help mitigate or help address those issues or needs that were identified in the survey. The plus side here, what I see overall first impressions of the data set is that our work plan is pretty well aligned with what kind of came out of the survey. When looking at, they want some additional downtown planning that came up in a couple of the answers. We are addressing that. Communications we're working on. So I'd see a lot of the requests that came out of this survey to really we're already kind of working on that in some way, shape, or form. But that final report will be drafted and submitted back to the EDA for review and final adoption. So we will memorialize this data in a larger report that will be then placed into the record. So with that, happy to answer any questions the EDA may have regarding the current status of the BR&E report.
Thank you, Dan. That was very thorough. What questions do we have of Dan? Thoughts on either feedback, next steps, other items? I suspect it's a data set we will all earmark and keep on frequent rotation. So it's just good to have in our back pocket, and especially as we're considering next steps here. It's a great foundation. Any other immediate responses, questions, anything that needs to be addressed this evening?
Just, Dan, on those, what was the total number? Maybe it's in the packet of surveys that were sent out as opposed to, I saw the percentage, but what was that number? Was that?
I believe it was in right around 60 plus or minus businesses were identified as being on the original survey, and we got 30. So I think it was like 61 or 62 were on the original list that were submitted to all the membership, and 30 came back in.
Are you able to tell which ones were actually given out to people, or it? I don't know how were that able to tell how many surveys were actually sent out and they just didn't reply, or can you not tell that? Once you gave it to the members, it was probably hard to track if they were sent or not.
Correct. I can track who filled them out. I can go back, and again, it was sort of if they didn't fill out that initial, question number one, who they are, what industry they're in. I won't be able to tell exactly who they are, but for the most part, I could try to recreate which ones are still out there if you wanted to kind of build on this next steps and try to get the rest of that sample set accounted for. But I can't tell if they got the surveys and didn't respond to them. I can only tell based on the data who actually filled it out.
Well, yeah, I guess that's where I was going at. For next steps, do we want to try to, if we maybe hit them at the wrong time, do we want to try to send it back out or get more feedback, or is everyone comfortable with what we've gotten? I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that.
I think there's always value in a more complete data set. That said, I feel like there are areas of consensus. And of course, the unstructured data is always helpful and always just helpful to hear that feedback. And so I'm open to doing another round of, kind of going back again and But I wonder if there's maybe an opportunity for us to recognize that there has been some time passed and, you know, we're in this rapidly evolving environment, that maybe we would just note those second respondents or that next round as being part of that group. If that changes some of the response specifically around COVID or some of the other areas. So, but I'm open to feedback. Thoughts of the group?
I
Mark,
suppose,
go ahead.
I suppose it would be interesting, certainly, to, we only got the 50% response, to see who those 50% didn't respond or weren't contacted would be. If nothing else, just to understand the type of business that they were. Some businesses weren't really terribly interested in talking, and others were. It'd be kind of a curiosity on my part to see if we couldn't at least know what businesses were on our agenda but were not achieved. And I, for one, would be willing to recontact if that was a possibility.
Yeah, I
Is
didn't bring
that
it up. I didn't bring it up as that we needed to. I just was wondering what everyone else thought. I think it's good. That's great feedback. It's great to hear the thoughts of more communication between the city and businesses. I mean, it's maybe that is a good sample set, but I just was just curious. I think either way, Danny did a great job of getting those questions, getting that out, and it's just good to get that. And maybe that's something we do once a year with just another group or something, or however what the future, you know, with this holds.
And I think one thing to keep in mind too is that when I looked at this in terms of, I wouldn't necessarily get hung up on the total number, because I think when we look back at 2011, they went out to 100 businesses at that point with a much larger group effort, right? And kind of given the speed at which this program was developed, the speed at which we went out and actually completed that survey, I mean, to have a 50% response rate is pretty impressive. I mean, when I saw that number come in, I was like, you know, it blew my expectations as to what I would see from a sample set. So I think we do have a very good sample set to start with, you know, and if we want to review this or revisit this on an annual basis, I mean, the survey was designed to be such where it's not going to be something that takes a business owner an hour and a half to fill out. It's sort of one of those things where they can get it done in 10, 15 minutes. And you know, we can kind of continually modify, you know, what those questions are. You know, we may not have as big of a COVID impact in, say, 22 as we would have in 20. So we can change those questions slightly and still, you know, get good data. But overall, this first round of surveys, you know, from my perspective, I mean, we have a very good sample set and a very, very good response rate based on the fact that we went on a smaller overall scale compared to what we did in 2011.
Would it be difficult, Dan, to the 30 businesses that did not respond or weren't approached in one form or another, to just get some kind of feedback? Is it difficult for you to say there was 5 small service entities, there were 3 corporations? Is there a way to understand a little bit about who wasn't participating? I'm still curious because our downtown participation in the downtown committee isn't really represented by many people that are actively there or online. And it's such a low percentage that I've become concerned that we're not reaching people well. So I would be interested in that if that doesn't put you through a grind.
No, I should be able to go back through the original list, check off the ones that were done, and then sort of segment out or put those in buckets based on, like you said, kind of industry sector or, you know, size, et cetera, and see where the gaps are, if there are already gaps that show up, you know. So I can definitely, it won't be that hard for me to go back to the spreadsheet and just, you know, kind of do some retooling there. It won't be a big issue.
I would appreciate that.
That's great feedback. Any other questions on BRNE follow-ups? Not seeing any, and recognition of our time here. We will move on to the Washington County update. Chris Eng, thank you for being here tonight. Welcome.
Thank you, President Bain and members. No formal update for you. But I would be happy to stand for any questions if you have any.
Any questions for Chris this evening? Seeing none. We don't have Nan here for a chamber update either. And just open it up for a broader city updates. Deanna, Patrick, Ryan, any city specific updates we would like to share with the EDA this evening?
Yeah, I have one. We are considering and probably will put into place similar loosening of the outdoor dining rules for the rest of this year through September, as we did last year, to try to make those businesses have a little bit more room and space. We're doing that because we really don't know what the limits are going to be or when they're going to end. So we thought we would do the same thing as we did last year. And all the businesses have to do is fill out a simple application like they did last time, and we can get those approved without a lot of fanfare.
That's great. Mark, go ahead.
I have a question for Ryan, if I could. I tried to work my way through the watershed issue and their formal statements in the report. The one thing I gleaned from it was that there is still this opportunity, and it seemed to be pretty clear in there that they can take care of a lot of the mitigation issues off-site, and it's a matter of being in the same watershed, and it's a matter of being, I don't know, there's an inventory of properties that are defined, or maybe there's inventory of properties you just have to go find. But I was just curious from Ryan, if what he's noticed in any of the discussions for a downtown development, if we're still going to be fighting this square footage utilization, site occupancy, and all those kinds of things that factor into how much of the property we can actually use. Is that an ongoing debate, or can we rely on things like the offsite mitigation?
Just to answer your questions, we are working with the watershed to identify offsite opportunities, but we also want to be conscious of those opportunities and locations, how they might relate to future projects 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now.
Sure.
We don't want to, identify a location and then all of a sudden when we have a street project, we need to utilize that space, whether it's for a public project or a private project. And, that makes things more difficult for future projects too. So we're going through some separate meetings and identifying those spots, cost estimating, and then we also want to get basically public works approval and city administration approval too before we make anything public or final in that report. The unique thing about our downtown is we're pretty well locked with the lake on one side and trunk highway down the middle, and an old railroad authority that's has the Hardwood Creek Trail. So the corridors are very tight, and the topography isn't all in our favor as well. So if everything drained, from Highway 61 to the west and had ample opportunity to do something, down that way, that would certainly help things a lot and make things easier. But we had such small drainage areas that are, in the area that we're working in such a small area that we're going to want to identify those locations to meet stormwater requirements offsite in a different location within the same watershed. Because we want to maintain the character that's been talked about, and the desire that your group, other community groups, council groups, public surveys want the downtown to continue as what we have today and extend that further north and south, which directly reflects that 2040 comp plan you guys significantly changed and approved, want to continue that vision growing north and south. So that's why we'll be looking offsite in this downtown district.
Ryan, when you think of the planning effort that's going to take place, I don't know if it's going to pace with your decisions with everyone else about these offsite areas, but you can see that there will be a restriction on what the planners can consider in terms of how dense, how packed, how much can happen downtown. They'll have to make some choices somewhere midsummer about what they're trying to represent as potential directions that things can take. Do you think by midsummer we will have a sense of whether we can really start to impose a greater density downtown?
We're moving forward with the assumption your density is moving forward with the zero setback that's allowed in your downtown area. Therefore, we take the square footage of what's out there today, and that's what we're trying to find the offsite mitigation for. So that should not affect any decisions that are going to be made upon with your planner, other than probably parking. I mean,
Well, there's
how do you
also
maneuver through that scenario. Are you willing to trade building square footage for parking? Are they gonna propose something with a parking ramp, underground parking of redevelopment? But as far as watershed, all 100% square footage within the downtown block area, we're looking to mitigate offsite.
So does that translate vertically? I mean,
It doesn't matter vertically, it only matters horizontally.
Okay, good. That's what I'm after.
But
Thank you.
you're governed vertically by your city ordinance and development code.
I understood. I'm just curious about the watershed and the impact there, because if the square footage can at least remain as is, hard surface to green to, if there is any, to parking and the rest, then that battle can be fought. That the vertical isn't necessarily consequenced other than parking and the balance of the rules that affect.
Other questions this evening? Otherwise, we are at the end of our planned agenda, and I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Can I, Mark, can I just ask another question? It goes back to the question earlier about meeting in person and that, and I know what the governor's saying, and they just announced today that they're going to allow 3,000 people into Wild and Timberwolf games. You can be at Target Field at 10,000. Is that city by city, or is that just a state order? Going through the process through this, I think the Zoom thing has worked out well. The city's done a really nice job, as cumbersome as it is at times, with making this happen. But going through the planning commission process that I went through and working through some right now, not having that face-to-face contact, just it is different. And if we're talking about bigger developers and opportunities where people want to meet, and some cities are allowing that and we are not, I just want to make sure that we're doing what maybe the majority of the cities are doing, or similar sized cities, and maybe we are, I don't know. So I just asked that question and would hope that we could try to get back in person as soon as possible.
So I'll take this one, and I'm just giving my perspective. So it's tough to know what city, are we in the majority or not? It is city by city. The governor's order, if I understand it correctly, is that it gives preference for remote municipal meetings and remote government meetings, like the public official meetings, when possible. I've recently had a couple of experiences outside of my city meetings of in-person meetings with masks. And I think one of our limitations is when we start to get some larger groups, the amount of space that it takes to social distance. Tonight is a small meeting for us, and we've got 11 people. And so the amount of space that it would take for us to have a good experience with mics and cameras, because it still has to be a public meeting, I think we get limited quickly by space. And so that's been a challenging consideration for us to be in person. Now, if we're talking about a subgroup of parks, trails, and lakes, they're able to meet in person and do some planning together. Or if we're talking about a subgroup of this EDA and the downtown committee meeting with some stakeholders, that can also be a good in-person experience. Our challenge has been our downtown committee meetings quickly get up to about 25 people, and getting 25 people social distance and have it still be a good audio experience. Personally, that's the part that has been tough for me to be able to get comfortable that we're still giving a good, it's a good meeting experience. So there's some logistics, and then it's that weighed in along with the preference that's been in the governor's orders. From my perspective, that's been my support of continuing our full meetings as being remote. But I'm optimistic that we're turning the corner here, and tough to tell when, but I do think that there is a day in the near future where we are we're able to be closer and still able to have a good meeting experience.
If I could just add one thing to that, we looked at the technologies in the council chambers to allow sort of that blended option of in-person and remote. But just to that point, that adds a whole nother level of complexity in terms of how do you manage the meeting. We have the technology to do it, but I was in there today for about an hour trying to figure out how do we manage people in the room versus out of the room? How do we do screen sharing? All the stuff that we're doing now fully remote. When you add that in-person council chambers element, exponentially makes the conversation more complicated because you have to try to figure out how do you get your audio in from, the system into the room plus the screen sharing. So we're working on solutions. It's just that right now we will get it developed. We're just a little bit of ways away from allowing that in-person or blended option because, again, like I said, it's just everybody remote. It's one set of standards, but when you have that in-person option, it changes the calculus pretty quickly. And I walked out of that meeting, my brain was starting to melt, just trying to figure out all the different permutations of how this stuff works. So we're working on it and we'll get something in place, but we're probably still a little bit of ways away from having that solution fully ironed out at this point.
The other challenge is that the open meeting law requires that we are either all remote or we're all in person. And so all in person might, conceivably be that we are split between being in council chambers and upstairs in the, in the community room, but then you've got to have the technology to support that. And it gets quickly into something where I'm not convinced that for our larger official council and committee meetings that it's a better experience. So that's the other part of dynamic is it does force everyone to be in a public space. We don't all have to be in the same public space, but we do all have to be in a public space. And that also is challenging. So small groups, less than quorum, working groups, able to accommodate some face-to-face, because I agree with you, it's better. But as soon as we're in a space where we have to start considering masking and we don't have good audio, it's tough.
Yeah, and I understand. So I think more of my point on it, since it's EDA related, just we meeting with developers and that and having those one-on-ones. I have one on Wednesday with Donovan, and so we're remote and we're going to be together, but he's in another room, so just I think that's something that's the sooner that could happen might just help. But
and that feedback is good for us to hear and good for us to bring back to staff of, we should be accommodating in person when we can safely. And yes, that is good feedback.
Again, you guys have done a great job of making this work. I can't imagine when you talk about Dan, your head ready to explode on something. I can't imagine the scenarios and things that you guys and Karen and everyone's gone through. So I appreciate that for sure.
Good question though, and let's get back in person as soon as we can because it is better. All right, with that, entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Well,
Member Lorge and a second from Member Roberts. Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Member Roberts,
Aye.
Member Husnick,
Aye.
Benneman,
Aye.
Member Lorge,
Aye.
and President Bain.
Aye, and we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.
Yes.